One of the problems with recruiting for investment banking is not the knowledge or skills you acquire, but the access to talk with real investment bankers to put your best foot forward. Our sponsor, WSO Academy, can provide those connections with 60 head mentors who are finance professionals at top firms like Goldman, Centerview, and JP Morgan. Imagine being able to get on the phone within 24 hours with one of the Academy's 1,300 mentors right before a critical interview. Get on the waitlist for WSO Academy today by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting wallstreetoasis.com/academy. All right. Welcome to Investment Banking Insights. My name is Alex Mason and I am your host. This is the only show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of the investment banking process. And I'm so excited to have you here for our very first interview here on the show. I'm here with my friend Sandy Lee. I talked to Sandy a few weeks ago during the winter break and just had some great conversation. Her and I met at a conference last year in 2023, and I'm just really impressed by what she had to share. And so after the conference, I said, hey, why don't you come on the show if you're up for it? And Sandy graciously agreed to come on the show. She is a former investment banker with Morgan Stanley, has been a recruiter, has been a coach, and actually currently is a coach. She coaches executives and MBA students and professionals alike in their journeys, lots of finance experience, and just really great way of communicating how to be excellent at your job, and just wanted to share some of her insights with you. So let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with Sandy Lee. Okay, I'm here today with Sandy Lee. Sandy, welcome to Investment Banking Insights.
Thank you very much, Alex. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great and excited to talk to your audience and see how I can be helpful as they embark on their journeys into investment banking.
Awesome. Yeah, we have many people listening to this show specifically because they're in some place in their careers that's not investment banking. Maybe they're undergrads, maybe they're in their MBA programs, or maybe they're working professionals who are just trying to figure out what this world is all about. Because I remember when I was just starting this journey a little bit less than a year ago, I didn't really know what was going on in investment banking. And it turns out there's just so much to learn. And talking to experts like you has been really helpful in my journey. So yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Sandy, you have a lot of different experience over the years, and I don't think we'll get the chance to go through all of it today, but I know there's a lot to share. Can you just start off by sharing with us just a little bit about yourself, where you come from, where you live, and how did you get your professional journey started?
Sure. So I started my career after graduating from Wharton in investment banking with Morgan Stanley, first in London in capital markets covering financial institutions, then in Hong Kong in corporate finance covering general industrials, and my last stop was in Houston in energy M&A before getting recruited into the recruiting world back in 2005. And I spent about 4 years in New York placing C-level executives in banking, private equity, and hedge funds. And then I moved to Los Angeles, where I'm based now, to build and run the West Coast practice for my New York-based recruiting firm. And that's when that expanded me beyond financial services into consulting, corporates, tech, VC, entrepreneurship, and social impact. And when I had kids, I was just very honest with myself that I was not going to be able to maintain my 1 week in New York, 1 week in LA bi-coastal lifestyle. So that's when I launched my own independent recruiting and executive coaching practice. And at this point, I have now coached over 40,000 executives globally. And I take that unique blend of industry as well as recruiting expertise to help individuals and organizations achieve targeted success goals. And coaching at the corporate level, on topics like, how executive presence, retaining talent, how to build cultures, team building, allyship. But at the top MBA schools, a lot of it's about career transition, right? It's getting to make the move that you want. And a lot of times you're a career switcher where you think that you actually don't know what you're going into and what you're doing. Yet you have to project as if you are the expert that's ready to hit the ground running. And that's how I got to you, Alex.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Yeah, so Sandy and I, for the listeners, Sandy and I met at an MBA related event in Los Angeles not too long ago. And I remember when you were telling us a little bit about yourself during that event, saying that you coach 40,000 people. My mind was blown by that. Like I didn't even know that was humanly possible, but yeah, amazing experience there. And there's just really a lot to unpack there in your story. But you said some interesting things there kind of toward the end in terms of career transitions. Like that's exactly what my story is like. I'm transitioning from the aerospace engineering world into investment banking. What are some things that people who want to make that transition should consider before they even set foot on this path of banking? Because it's not an easy path, especially for many of us. So, what are some things that people should think about before they even get going on the journey?
I think the first thing is, why do you even want the job? Like, hands down, the two key questions when you're recruiting are, oh, Alex, tell me about yourself. And then the next one is, why do you want to do investment banking? So, the tell me about yourself, everybody has their own unique story. And what makes you special, sometimes you don't even know, right? And when I start off my private coaching, my initial session with everybody is a deep dive into your professional, personal background, what your motivations are. And I had a CFO tell me, he was like, Sandy, I feel like you did an audit of my personal and professional life. And that is sort of your baseline. You want to figure out what is your story and what are you pitching, right? And then value proposition is something I talk a lot about. People say, oh, this is my history. This is where I'm from. This is the MBA. And then now I want to go pivot into investment banking, or now I want to work for XYZ firm. But a lot of that is more just, I want. It's not, what do you have to offer? And that value proposition is challenging because oftentimes you don't actually know how it's going to apply to the role that you're in. And that's the first baseline that I tend to coach people on, whether they are MBAs or, HBS alums 30 years into their career trying to get on corporate boards. It's that same issue of, okay, well, if everybody is super talented, why you? And so that is, what do you have to offer? Why is it differentiated? Why is it relevant to what you're applying for? And especially for career switchers, why is being different going to make you a better banker? So being able to answer those questions just even in your own mind, not just you want it for XYZ reasons, but what do you have to contribute?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful answer. It kind of strikes to the heart of the matter, which is, I mean, how are you helping? And I think that is true, maybe even more generally beyond investment banking to really any job or career. Is how are you providing value? But when it comes to banking, obviously, I think a first step is even understanding what it is and what the field is all about, but then making that connection between who you are, what you've done, what are those transferable skills that will allow you to differentiate, like you said.
And I would recommend looking at your skill set like a portfolio of assets. It's not enough just to want a job because you want to learn, you want to get paid more, you want to work with smart people, you want to influence big corporations. That is part of the job, but that's not necessarily why they need you. That's why you want to go there, but that's not why they need you. So if I look at a candidate as a portfolio of skills, you might have, a segment for just your background, your credibility, what brand names have you come from, what's your tenure, what level of seniority are you coming from? Then there's another pocket which would be your hard skills. right? Like, what have you done in engineering, in your products, your industries? How much finance knowledge do you have? Do you have a lot of valuation modeling or transaction or deal experience, right? Like, what are your hard skills? Another quadrant would be your soft skills, leadership, communication, your network. They want to know that you're ready to be put in front of C suite executives from the largest, most influential companies in the world. And there's a certain amount of polish and maturity that comes from that. And then that last piece is the value proposition of why you, because when there are thousands of applicants, it's not that somebody's not qualified, it's that, well, a lot of people are qualified. So then, as a recruiter, even just sifting through all of the resumes or listening to everybody's elevator pitch or going through all the interviews, you have a lot of people that you like and they're nice, or you have this great social rapport. But what's going to be unique about them as an asset? And that is that value proposition that's a little bit more nebulous. Being able to
Okay.
articulate that. And then the next piece is concision, because getting 20 years of your life or 30 years of your experience into a 1 minute pitch that's easy to digest. So the concision is something else that people struggle with. And then on top of that, you need to layer in the tangible specifics that show the characteristics and qualities and assets, not tell them. If you're like, oh yeah, I'm a great leader. Well, how? Right? What are the organizations? What are the initiatives that you ran? What's the position? What's the impact? Right? And being able to make it tangible in actual hard dollars or percentages, customer satisfaction, difference in efficiency, difference in speed, production, like being able to tie it to something that either has a monetary value, the bigger the better, or a percentage that shows why you did it better than everybody else.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot about clarity, really understanding what that value is that you bring and being able to communicate it concisely in a very clear way. And I think a great example actually is the way that we open this podcast when you were just telling us a little bit about yourself. That pitch right there, even though it was just a minute or so long, it told me so much about where you've come from, what you've done, what you're doing now. And you can see the connections from point A to B to C very quickly. It's easy to see that you've refined that a lot over time. But I want to take you back, Sandy. If you could think back with me to when you were in that position of looking for the investment banking job, your first banking job, when you were at Wharton, how did you think about that? Because you didn't have all of these life and career experiences that you mentioned a few minutes ago at that point in time, right? You were in school, you were hustling and interviewing with firms. How did you approach it for yourself in terms of conveying your own value proposition back in those moments? Could you take us there to?
That's actually kind of funny because when I started at Wharton, I had zero intention of going into investment banking. During recruiting, I really was set on management consulting. And that's what I prepped for. Case prep, interviewing for consulting, the MBBs of the world. And my boyfriend at the time was at McKinsey. My first choice was actually Bain. Probably would have ended up Bain LA. I mean, that's sort of the direction that I was going in. And this is a little bit dated, but back when I was in the recruiting stages, everything was paper. Okay. Like we actually had to write cover letters, print them out with our resumes, mail things, right? And that was the very first year at Wharton that resume drops went digital. And so with career services and on-campus recruiting, you just have tons and tons of job recs. And instead of actually physically mailing envelopes, you could just now for the first time click a box and your resume and stuff would go out. So I honestly did not know that I had even applied for Morgan Stanley because I didn't apply for investment banking. I wasn't planning on going down that route. And when I got the call, I didn't even really know who they were. They just said, "Oh, we want you to come in and interview for Morgan Stanley." And I had to do a quick double take. I was like, "What? Who? What am I doing?" Right? And then I had to go back and look. It's like, did I even apply? Where did they get my information? And because my boyfriend at the time was living in Hong Kong, I think I might have just clicked on the box because it was Morgan Stanley Hong Kong. So I was like, okay. And so then I had about a week and a half to crash course learn everything about investment banking recruiting as possible, which is why I'm so sympathetic to all the MBAs doing it because I know what that feels like. It's like, okay, I have to do the prep, I have to do the finance, I have to do all the technical questions and get my investment banking answers. And I had to talk to a bunch of other people who had previously either alums or friends who had done internships or something. Like I needed to get the intel of what the job was even like. So that was that quick crash course. And honestly, what I think moved the dial when I had all these meetings, I didn't have the cookie cutter experience that everybody had because I wasn't super finance concentrated. They loved the perspective that I brought, they loved the experiences, and I connected on many levels where honestly, I think they didn't have anyone that pulled the skill set that I brought. And the way that I connected with people, I didn't have the crazy pitch down like I had been glossed over pretending that I wanted to do banking my entire life. It was more about how I added value in a different way in every organization I'd ever worked for. And the leadership opportunities, transforming initiatives, and adding value using creativity that no one had ever thought of. And I think the relevant information was having also a reason to be in Hong Kong. And then when I got the offer, I actually still wasn't even sure that I was going to take it. I went on the interview
Wow.
thinking, okay, this is going to be some interview experience. Let me just go and check it out. And when I got the offer, one of the reasons why I took it was because they offered me not just a full-time Hong Kong program, they offered me the Hong Kong pipeline program. So I knew that I would go to London first and then go to Hong Kong afterwards. And that year, keep in mind that the year I went was right after 9/11. So recruiting at all the investment banks for Wall Street probably got reduced by almost half, right? So we had fewer heads to begin with. And I was one of three offers they gave for that specific Hong Kong pipeline program. One person from the US, one person from London, and one person from Hong Kong. And that kind of expat package, expat experience to know that I would get a lot of the training and get a chance to live and work in Europe and then move and then get a chance to live and work in Asia. That's actually what sold me on banking. It wasn't necessarily the finance. If anything, I was the non finance candidate. And that's what did it. But if I had a takeaway from that, it was how am I going to differentiate myself such that I'm an asset wherever I go? And that continued to be in my references. And even when I got to investment banking, like most people going into investment banking, you are clueless. All right, let's be honest. You have training, you have as much training and prep as you can, and you can come from the best business schools out there. But what you do on the job is still pretty different from anything that you've prepped, which is one of the reasons why I do the IB pitch books and IB modeling type coaching, because you usually don't actually see finished products of what you're even trying to create, right? And when I got on board, most of it felt like drinking out of a fire hose. And it happened to be a very volatile time. So that first year, my own team turned over multiple times just within 1 year, right? The MD that I reported to at the beginning of the year was not the MD I reported to by the end of the year. The VPs and the people that were mid-level that were supposed to be training me were not the same people by the end of the year. And being able to have multiple rounds of layoffs in a downturn created different elements of uncertainty, and it was a tough environment. It was a tough environment. But on the flip side, I actually got a lot of deal exposure way beyond my tenure because people above me kept shifting out, right? So being able to run with that. And when it came time to go to Hong Kong, some of the negotiation and interviewing and recruiting internally within the firm, the natural way for me to get slated from London to Hong Kong would have been to stay in the same industry, right? Or to the same product and just do it in a different geography. However, that's not always where the openings are. And being able to have your manager vouch for you. One of the challenging pieces, the managers that I worked with didn't actually see all of the path because they weren't the same managers from the very beginning. So being able to leverage on the class that I came with, and again, for everyone in the MBA programs, it's not just your cohort or it's not just your MBA peers for your school. There's a reason why they want your class to be able to interact with people from all over. Because when you go out throughout the firm, maintain those relationships. They help you out, right? So, like, I was able to source where the open seats were through my peers a lot better because I maintained those relationships. So, I got to find the skinny in the dirt on which groups were more engaging, more interesting. They had better deal flow. Their officers were a little more respectful for lifestyle, et cetera. So it was sort of like, okay, knowing where I'm headed, that was beneficial. And being able to then, now I know where I want to go, work backwards to see if my MD or my VP can put in a good word to put in, right? So that first transition, I'll admit, the situations were steering me. I wasn't steering my situations. My situations were steering me. And that's why a lot of what I do now as a coach, it's because I've had those experiences where one piece of advice is rather than just bumbling through organically with your job moves, one piece of advice I wish I would have known is to be more intentional from day one. Look at that portfolio of skills. Look at where you're an asset. Look at where you want to add value. And then what experiences do you want to gain to upgrade your portfolio? Right. So my early years, I was just learning whatever and getting staffed on what other people wanted to staff me on. Right. My second year, my second rotation, when I was in Hong Kong, learning a completely new landscape of companies, industries in our region. I think all of that was, again, starting from scratch. What I was
Yeah.
able to transfer was the execution rigor and the attention to detail, right? A lot of the deals, the structures, the types of exhibits, what we were doing was different. But I think my saving grace between the first rotation to the next was just attention to detail and execution, right? It wasn't
Okay.
necessarily finance. It wasn't
Okay.
necessarily finance.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Sandy. Yeah. There's a lot there I want to dig into. But that last piece there, talking about execution, attention to detail, again, these are not really finance related things, like you're saying,
They're
but
not.
they're so important. When circling back to the beginning of your story, I'm still kind of stuck on that, honestly, of how you went from not knowing about investment banking to all of a sudden you have this Morgan Stanley offer. Obviously, you had to study, certain things related to banking to prepare for your interviews. But what you alluded to is that there were certain attributes that you had, certain transferable skills, certain things about you that made you stand out.
Mhm.
What were those things? What are those things that you had cultivated in yourself, or maybe intrinsic characteristics that you know about yourself that you believe aided you in getting that offer in the first place?
So creativity is one, and being able to solve problems or identify how to make business happen. How to make
Hmm.
business happen. And I mean, it depends. This could be a really long podcast. This could be a really long
Well,
podcast.
Well, let's tease that out because I've never heard anyone say that phrase before, which is I think it's a nice phrase, learning how to make business happen. Are you saying that you develop the skill of being able to go into a business situation and effectively understand what needs to be done by whom and when and be able to kind of keep things moving in motion? Is that what you're alluding to, or am I missing the mark there?
No, that's it. That's it. Like make things happen. So the I'll give an example from my Hong Kong days. Junior bankers are required to do a lot of grunt work. People don't like it, and honestly, that's probably why a lot of people choose to leave. However, sometimes doing the grunt work with that amount of execution and rigor. So, for one client, they were doing a bond deal, a bond offering, and it was an Asia based client, and we needed to take them on a roadshow for the bond deal. And there's a lot of admin setting up, booking cars, booking hotels, the nitty gritty logistics of setting up a lot of meetings for the roadshow. In addition to the modeling, in addition to the presentations, in addition to the pitch decks, et cetera, right? Like when you're a banker, you kind of have to do things soup to nuts, right? You just do. You're responsible for everything and you want that taken care of flawlessly. So last minute, the MD who was supposed to take the CEO, the COO, and the CFO on this roadshow, kind of last minute, he couldn't make it. He had a different work obligation, different deal that was happening. And so he just said, look, Sandy, you've done all the legwork. Why don't you take the team on the roadshow? And I was just like, seriously, wow. Okay. Because I was the closest to it. I knew everything. So here I am
And
in my
and
20s.
sorry, were you an analyst, associate? What level at point in the organization were you?
I was an analyst.
Wow. Okay. And you had the
Yeah.
MD come to you and say, I want you to take
Yep.
these clients on or these people on the
Yep.
roadshow.
And
Wow.
so I took them on a roadshow. And when I talk about execution, it's like, okay, yes, you've got a schedule. You need to get them from point A to B. You need to do everything so that it runs smoothly. I consider that pretty basic, but a lot of people would have just stopped it there, right? Put a lot of those presentations together. So when I'm listening to every investor presentation, not only am I taking notes, but I'm noting the investor comments, the body language, how the CEO, the CFO, like what are the connections? I'm giving them a lot of intel based on what I observe. And it's funny because as an executive coach, that's what I do now. It's executive presence, it's content, it's pitch, it's, how are they responding to you? What's the sales pitch, right? And then at the end of those presentations, I could have just passively done nothing, right? Like the baseline would be just to make sure that the roadshow goes well. No. Then the other level would be, oh, I took all these notes. I took all these minutes. Let me type them up and make them all clean. It's like, okay, that's another level. And I did that. But then there's also the third piece, which is, well, I have an opinion. I have an opinion about the way the message is being received, the way it's being marketed. And then there were elements of this is China focused company where the management team is culturally Asian. We're on a roadshow in the US, right? So being able to have someone who bridges those two cultures, that's important as well, right? And so from a business perspective, I remember being in my early 20s. It's like, wow, the CEO of a multi-billion dollar company cares about what I think he should do with his business. And so it's not just the roadshow, then it also morphs into the strategy behind the financing and the actual deal. And again, I had put those models together, right? So I have a view on what that looks like, right? But then it also doesn't stop there. In between all these like short little trips for the car ride, the dinner, the this, I'm not afraid to make conversation with them because at the end of the day, they are people. So I got to know them at a very personal level. I knew about their wives, their girlfriends, their kids, the different elements of how their lives evolved, right? So being able to get to know them intimately. And then when it comes to just making sure they had a good time, this is the first roadshow they'd ever done in the US. When they went to New York, I took them to Broadway show. And it's like, well, what can we do for fun? Right? Like, what are the coolest French restaurants that we can go to? Let's eat the frog legs. Let's eat all the stuff that you would never normally do, right? Like being able to show them a good time. And that experience, it was a week. And we did that in New York and Boston and Chicago and San Francisco. So being able to have that level of content, the credibility, the cultural aspect, the soft skills, and then tying it all together for that value proposition. Years later, even after I left Morgan Stanley, I still kept in touch with this management team, and they were like, "We've never had a roadshow as fun as the one that we took you on," right? So it was just like, wow. And that experience was great. And so when the next time they wanted to do another deal, they called me, right? And my MD, I think I was very fortunate that some MDs or some people, when it comes to business development, they may be very territorial or they want to hold on to their client relationship. Some may feel threatened by it's like, oh, okay, well, this is my relationship. My MD was really supportive. And it was actually in my performance review. Sandy Lee is the only analyst who has her own clients.
Wow.
Again, it comes not just from finance, not just from strategy, but there's taking it to a different level of execution, interpersonal skills, and making things happen. And in my interview, I had lots of stories of seemingly ordinary things or a certain problem that needed to be solved, and then just going at it until it became a huge deal. And likewise, when I went to Houston, some of the evolution there, someone needed to run regional recruiting, right? Usually somebody from banking needs to run that process. A lot of times people don't want to do it because it's not really how you get paid. It takes up a lot of time and nobody wanted to volunteer. So, okay, staff Sandy on it, right? So it's like, okay, I'll do it. That's fine. And something that, again, baseline would be you have the schedule, you go to the universities, you have the interviews, and then you pick people. Something that I witnessed early did not like. I was involved with recruiting and interviewing for the Ivy League candidates that were interested in Asia. And we went through a whole process, and something that I saw, and it wasn't just at Morgan Stanley, it was at other firms. Sometimes people get hired just because they're the son or the daughter of a client. So you can go through this entire process, and at the end of the day, the offer goes to someone who has a specific relationship. And that continues to happen in firms and in corporate America everywhere. So when it came time for Houston, I was like, okay, I will be the regional recruiting contact. Execution wise, making sure the schedules, making sure everything's flawless, making sure it runs tight. I consider that pretty basic. But when it came to candidate selection, I ran it like a deal. I started off with like, what are the qualifications? I'm not going to let somebody just get hired just because. It's like, no, let's agree. What are the qualifications? What's the matrix? What are the attributes of the person that we want? And then when it came time to actually presenting the candidates, I ran it like a valuation deal. And that became notable because it was like, whoa, we've never had anybody run a recruiting process like this. And I didn't know it at the time, but that would partially be the influence that I took to my recruiting practice later on, right? And, word of mouth happens. When you do good work, people notice, word of mouth happens. That's actually partly how I got called for recruiting. I was like, hey, I hear that you might have the personality for this. Russell Reynolds called me. They're like, would you meet with some of our folks? And I was just like, why? To be a recruiter? Like to be a headhunter? No, honestly, I was like, I'm not interested. And this was someone who was a friend of a friend. So she was like, well, just do me a favor, come in and talk to some people. I think that you might just have a knack for it. And I was like, okay, well, I'm always open to meeting new people. So sure. I met with them and had great meetings, and they made me think really hard about what do I like about investment banking? I like that it's an execution, transaction-oriented business. I like doing deals. And I like that there is a business development client relationship component to it. And honestly, all of that was directly transferable to executive search, except instead of doing deals based on finance, I'm doing deals based on people. So then I thought of it like I'm the M&A of people banker. And then that's how I started to get interested into like, you know what? I think I might want to do recruiting. And for personal reasons, I was getting engaged and my then boyfriend, now husband, was living in New York. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to transfer to New York anyway. Why don't I explore some other options? And I didn't just go, I had an offer from Russell Reynolds, but I didn't just go to Russell Reynolds just because. I was like, you know what? If I'm going to leave Morgan Stanley, I'm going to leave it for good reasons because I actually loved working for the firm. I thought it was a tremendous, wonderful experience. I love the people that I worked with. And I don't think I ever entertained going to another investment. So if I left, it was going to be for something that was worth leaving Morgan Stanley for. Similarly, I either met or spoke with over 100 people on the executive search side, retained, recruiting, big firms, little firms, because I wanted to make sure it was the right fit.
And how did you go about that? Was that just you calling around people in your network who were in that field? Did you have a friend introduce you? Were you cold calling? How did you
All the above.
approach that career change?
All the above. So again,
Okay.
through the networking, yes, but also through some cold emails and some cold calls. And funny enough, that is actually how I ended up in the firm that I picked. I was down to offers from pretty much all of the big four, but the ones I was really debating between were Russell Reynolds, Heidrick and Struggles. And I was pretty sure that I was going to take Heidrick and Struggles. And when I went for the last sell day, someone in my interview, and they make you meet with a lot of people. They were like, "Oh, well, you may have heard our head of investment banking practice is leaving. So, but don't worry about that. We've got it figured out." And I was like, "Whoa, that matters to me, right? Like that matters to me. Why are they leaving?" Right? And so it turns out that person had left to go be a CEO and basically run a tech recruiting firm that was starting out a whole financial services practice. So he became the CEO of that firm. And I just looked them up on the website, did a cold email to the head of the financial services practice, and was very honest. Like, I am seriously considering accepting an offer from your previous firm. As I'm doing my due diligence, I would be very curious to get your thoughts on your previous firm. And he emailed me right back and he was very kind. We spent time together. And then he was like, "You should actually come here." And the opportunity to do that was get in on the ground running, be one of the first people at this new firm, this new practice, and build it out. And so I partnered with the head of the practice and the CEO and built out a firm and a platform and had a hand in hiring and interviewing a lot of the people. And we we were all very proud of what we built. We took something that was relatively new and not on people's radar screens and moved it up to a top 5 platform. And I loved my time in New York. And similarly, I had evolved with different products, industry, geographies, moved to the West Coast to try and run and build that out. And I had no intention of leaving. I'd done such a thorough process in the recruiting process. Like, I knew that was the firm that I wanted to be, and I was very proud of what we built together. I wouldn't have left, but my personal circumstances changed.
Wait.
I
Sorry.
became a mom.
Gotta pause you there before we
Sure.
continue on. And I definitely want to hear the next part of the story too. But hold up. So you had done your due diligence, you narrowed down the opportunities and companies within this recruiting space, down a couple of options.
Yep.
You were doing your due diligence. You heard from one of them that someone left, cold emailed that person or someone who was connected to that person, had a conversation, and then they recruited you to their thing.
Yes, because they
Wow.
wanted me to go and help build things, make it a big deal.
Okay. Wow. What a turn of events.
Right.
Okay. So then you were building that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's sort of like, okay, to be able to build something, grow something, and create and dominate, right? It's like, okay, so let me do things a different way. And honestly, when I went into recruiting, I was going up against, 50, 60-year-old Caucasian men who had grown up in HR at big corporations, and then that's how they maintained a lot of the relationships. Here I am, probably half the age, the complete opposite demographic, and I'm pitching to the same clients, right? So it's like, well, why would they hire me? I'm not from the HR world. I haven't grown up in recruiting. I don't have a Rolodex of placing all these C-level executives. Like, I'm not going to be able to go apples to apples with that. However, what I did have was, you know what? I'm the demographic of the people that you're trying to recruit, right? The technical knowledge, the financial. So again, going to those four quadrants, the credibility, having actually come from being a Morgan Stanley investment banker, having worked at different industry, product, geographies, like I can talk the talk. I can speak to the bankers and asset management and private equity in a way that people who don't have that financial technical experience can't. So, in a lot of ways, my recruiting became much more specialized because I could attract better talent because I come from the world that they come from. And I had better assessment qualities because I could sort through the noise. And then
Mm.
specifically, I was doing things in the credit distressed hedge fund world and building out. And most recruiters would take your resume, have an interview, and put you on a slate, right? Like that's where it is. But for me, because of the background I have, I case interviewed everybody. I was like, okay, well, Alex, pitch me a credit. I want to know what your investing style is. Like, actually, pitch me a name. I want to hear it. And then I can tell, it'll be like, no, you're not going to cross this bar. And the portfolio managers were floored by that because they were like, nobody does that. That's the sort of stuff that usually they're expected to do internally. And I'm like, well, yes, but I can do it for you. And that saves you a lot of time. And so then I kind of carved out a niche for myself because of that financial technical acumen. So the way I was bringing candidates to the table, the way I was offering value to my clients was different from the rest of the pool. And so, therefore, it didn't matter if I looked different or was different because what I had to offer, that value proposition, that stood out in itself. And
Yeah.
when that recruiting, so again, that transition from banking to recruiting was because I was the M&A of people banker. I ran it like a deal. And I originally got that because I had that experience recruiting, and I wouldn't have done that if it was because it was something that other people didn't want to do. So it was like, take those jobs that nobody wants to do and then just make a big deal out of it. Do it so well that it makes you shine. And then similarly in recruiting, part of that transition between recruiting and then coaching, on average, I would talk to about 300 people to make one hire. In recruiting land, not everybody takes that rigor. It's very common to say, okay, well, I did a CFO search. Let me just take the last CFO search. Let me pull the slate of people that were interested as candidates and let me just move that forward. For me, I consider that low hanging fruit. It's like, no, if I'm going to do a new search, I'm going to canvas the entire market, do all the market intel, map out the organizations that are the peers, identify the top level and then two levels down, get all the intel of who's good, who's happy, and then being able to actually recruit and cherry pick not the people who are looking, but the people who are the best. And then I was working on a search where I think I talked to 800 people for that search. And my client actually had already had someone in mind that they wanted to hire. They just wanted to be really thorough and use that as an opportunity to, canvas the market and meet talent. So it was sort of like, it wasn't necessarily the hire, it was being able to attract people and get them to the table that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So when we were doing due diligence on, okay, well, these are the targets, et cetera, I would get comments like, oh, well, he's the best, but you'll never get him because he's super happy. she's amazing, but she would never leave your firm. So, like, she would never leave her firm. So you'll never get her to the table. And it was sort of like, well, you want an audience with them? Let's do this. So being able to pull people to the table to even have a dialogue that others wouldn't have been able to, right? So whether it was getting the right person in the seat or having better quality people to have access to, and a lot of that comes from, again, the execution rigor and the financial technical acumen, and then the relationship building, right? So I think that's something that my clients appreciated, and they knew that they were getting a higher touch, higher quality service. And that was how it was able to get through a lot of those barriers. And that also worked, sometimes pros and cons, double-edged sword. So as I mentioned, on average, I talk to 300 people, give out one offer. What do you do with the 299? Right? You're technically paid by your client, your company, to make that one offer. But I would spend a lot of time with the 299 or with candidates that I thought were talented, but they weren't the offer. Because signing off candidates and giving them feedback about why not me, that's rare because that's not how recruiters are paid. Right? But I
Did
spent a
you
lot of
give
time.
feedback to the 299 or to a portion of the 299?
Yeah, pretty much everybody that I sign people off. And when I sign people off, they don't want to just know. I mean, an average recruiter will just say, hey, sorry, we're going a different direction, or it's not going to work out. Thank you very much. I'll try and put you forward on the next one. But that's not how I treat people. So I would take the time to explain. And a lot of that comes with interview prep, coaching, what's better for them and why they weren't the offer. And especially if they were close, it's like, well, why not you? Right. And then oddly enough, that actually became my coaching business because it's like not a lot of people are doing that at that level of granularity, not able to take the feedback and make it tangible. Right. And in some ways, when I wanted to start my own practice and have a flexible lifestyle, because that was a huge priority for me, I wanted to serve the clients that other people weren't serving, not in the same way. And there are tons, again, the coaching industry has also evolved a lot over the last 10, 15 years. But when I got into it, not a lot of people were doing it, period. Right. And even now that we have tons of coaches out there, they don't do it at the level of technical depth and breadth and the granularity and the anecdotal experience, right? Like I've interviewed and coached so many people, I've heard so many stories that it is sort of hard to give me a problem that I can't immediately say, "Oh, okay, great. You're dealing with this. This person had these challenges. This is what they did, pros and cons, and this worked, this didn't work." Right? And I keep everything confidential. Everything is anonymous. People's identities are protected because confidentiality is a two-way street, and I appreciate that. And I also share a lot of intel that in some ways can be difficult to hear, but that's the info you need to have. And maybe there are people standing behind your back, but I'm actually going to say it to your face.
Can you tell me about when you've worked with a client recruiting for banking, or maybe they were already a banker going into a different situation and you've given them feedback that was hard for them to swallow maybe at first? What are some of the things you've noticed in that person, and what did they ultimately do to correct or improve based on your feedback?
So I would break things down again. Usually it tends to be in those quadrants, right? So in my coaching, I'm able to give that objective third party opinion, but also it's a very informed opinion, having come from the industry and also from the recruiting side of how people package themselves. So it's not necessarily like, Alex, yes or no, you're good or bad at this. It's Alex relative to the market. Where are you? And being able to give that feedback is not only valuable, but it's distinctive because if you just hear, oh, you have bad communication skills or you're not a great leader, that's hard to absorb. But if you can give it in tangible specifics and relative to what other people are doing, it becomes a lot more palatable. And then that
Can you give
also
me an example of one of those tangible specifics of what that might look like and what someone might do to work on that?
so pick a category. I mean, there's so many different categories. Pick a category.
So you mentioned a few earlier. You mentioned there's the different quadrants. There's kind of the prestige, there's the hard skills, the more people skills, and then what was the fourth? Value proposition.
Hmm.
Let's focus on that one then, value proposition,
Okay.
because I feel like the other three, or like the hard skills and the people skills, I feel like get talked about a lot, and then the prestige is in some ways like it kind of is what it is at that point in time. Maybe you can change that over time, but there's more external forces involved relative to maybe say improving communication skills. But what about value proposition? What are some mistakes that candidates make when they're trying to relay their value proposition to an employer or to a client?
They lack track
And
record. They lack track record. So,
mm,
whatever their value proposition of what makes them unique, they need to be able to demonstrate the track record. It's how many deals, the billions of assets, what kinds of products, the client brand names that they've worked for. Those are some of the specifics where you've got to be able to express that. And that matters not only when you're recruiting, but if you want to get promoted internally, if you're selling to other clients, they want to know what your track record is. And cohesively, you want volume as well as quality, as well as tenure.
okay, so there's multiple dimensions
There are
there.
multiple dimensions.
Yeah.
There are multiple dimensions, and not everybody has them all. So if you look at it like a matrix, it's like, okay, well, wait, maybe I have really high quality deals, but I haven't done that many of them. All right. Well, then if you want to talk about it, talk about the depth of the soup to nuts of the impact that you had on a few of those deals, right? Maybe it's like, I lack the credibility because I'm from a second tier, third tier firm and I need to go to town with some of the biggest names out there. And it's like, okay, if you're going to lack the brand name, can you make it up with volume, right? It's like, okay, I haven't done $2 or $3 billion deals, but I've done a lot of smaller deals. So then it becomes the volume. And then it's like, okay, well, what experiences did you have from the volume of those transactions? What trends are you noticing? Right? You may not have a huge Rolodex of blue chip names, but maybe you have smaller firms where the clients know you so intimately well because you pay attention to them, right? Then it's the strength of the relationship you have with those particular clients, that C-level
Mm,
access, right? So it's like I'm giving you examples of the credibility piece, the finance numbers AUM or the dollars piece, the soft skills network of how deep know those people piece. And between those three quadrants and how you package it up, that is your value proposition.
yes. And it's
But that's
how
a very
you,
different
yeah.
way of representing a person than, oh, yeah, I'm a great banker, you should hire me. Or, oh, yeah, I went to this school or I have this experience. This is the name on my business card. It's like, well, there's a whole layer of depth that's missing. And then being able to package it so that it's concise. It's
Exactly. It's
easy
how
to
you tell
it's
the
easy to
story.
absorb. It's easy to absorb.
Yes, you have to tell the story in a way that it can be absorbed by the other person. And I love those three dimensions. You mentioned quality, quantity, and tenure.
Hmm.
And the way that I think about it is maybe like an analogy, like when I'm buying something online, like on Amazon or something like that. I'm looking at the number of reviews for the product. I'm looking at the quality of the reviews. Is it like 4 stars or better usually? And then like how long has this product been sold? Is this like a new thing? Is this the second, third, fourth generation? And so me as a consumer, I'm going in with potentially no knowledge, but from a couple of key indicators, I can increase the probability that I'm going to be satisfied with my purchase. And I'm just feeling like that's kind of the analogy here when it comes to value proposition in the world of banking or in the world of hedge funds or really quite
The
frankly,
world of
any
anything,
professional
the world
job.
of
Yeah,
anything, right? Like these parallels can go to any time you need to choose yes or no. How do you make a decision of yes or no? Do you want to reject something or do you want to accept something? All those things matter. And I think that's what a lot of candidates, whether you are early or late in your career, they're missing that piece. Why does it matter? Why you? Why does it matter? And what are the options if not you?
because it's all relative to the market, like you
Mhm,
said, right?
mhm.
The
If
the
that's the
pool that
only
you're competing
product
with.
that does that thing, then you're going to buy that product.
Exactly.
And the more commoditized a product, the more differentiated that value proposition has to be. And so in
Do
my
you
career, I kept making moves. I took what I liked about each job, and in some ways, I think I repackaged myself to serve and help a slice of the community or a particular subset of clients in a way that no one else was doing. No one else was doing it that way. And
so
even at
tell us
the
more about that. Now
sure, I
that
mean,
you have
it,
transitioned into coaching, as we're in the last few minutes here, you're now on your own. You run your own business, and what was that transition like? And now that you've been doing it for a number of years, how do you see your career evolving now from this point?
okay, excellent question. Where do I see it evolving now? As transitions go, one of the things that becomes challenging well, first of all, having had the brand name, the credibility, the structure, the execution, the process, I think a lot of the process coming into having a startup, I benefited from having the structure and all that first. I've also coached other people and clients where they started in the startup world first, wore lots of hats, got that exposure, and then they go to business school and then they need to have the technicals or they need to then develop the structure. Then need to develop the brand name, right? So, I mean, like I've seen it go both ways. You can take either track. But in some ways, I think because I had the structure first, it made my life as a startup easier because I had already built up the credibility, the track record of all the people that I had coached in my recruiting days. That was where a majority of my clients came from when I became an actual coach because it was just like, oh, well, I'm just going to keep doing what I've already been doing for the people that I was doing it with. And so doing good work will beget better work. That's not necessarily so much of a special sauce, right? So being able to have that. But even as my industries evolved, right? Like my product industry, geography mix, I think that enabled me to relate to my clients in a different way because I've had diversity. And I guess that's another reason why I resonate well with startups because I know what it feels like to be a startup, right? I know what it feels like to build that brand and to build your own brand, right? So I do a lot on executive presence, personal branding type coaching because it's sort of like, yeah, that's what I went through as well. And I mean, Alex, you've also seen it in person. Lots of coaches, there are a lot of programs, there are a lot of training programs out there that talk about preparing for interviews. But you've sat in on my workshops and you've seen that the level of granularity that I go into, the actual word choice swapping, the depth and breadth of that knowledge, you know it when you see it. And I think that's
Yeah.
where a lot of quality speaks for itself. Like you know it when you see it. And I'm kind of curious, like, why did it resonate so well with you?
Yeah, great question, Sandy. I think you kind of already said it right there. You know it when you see it. I think that as someone who is constantly just on a quest for knowledge and insight, even before this podcast existed, I had another podcast, you know, 250 episodes trying to find answers to other questions. And even before that, I was searching for other things. And so I think it's kind of like when you look for knowledge and insights so much so frequently, over time you start to see the patterns, as I'm sure you've seen them in many different domains yourself over the years, Sandy. there's a lot of generic advice, and there's also the ability to distinguish between kind of beginner level advice and consultation and more advanced level of knowledge and consultation. And in the first workshop where I saw you, I immediately recognized it as the latter. Like, okay, this is a little bit more nuanced understanding of how to present yourself in a business context, how to network, the fact that small talk is a big deal, little things make a huge difference, and identifying what those little idiosyncrasies are. I think that that's what stood out to me. And I think that connects with some things you were saying earlier about, from the candidate perspective or from the recruiter perspective, if you can filter people out right away by asking, give me your credit pitch or give me your stock pitch or whatever it is, then it becomes so much easier, because then those people can then get judged on the nuances, and then you find the one. And so yeah, those are my thoughts.
And I would agree because that's how, not just in the recruiting and getting into banking, or that's how it will be later on in your career, period. When you're sourcing a deal, when you're trying to get a new client, when you're fundraising, when you're trying to get on boards, that process of, if there are many choices to choose from, if you've got a lot of candidates to choose from, it'll be who stands out and why, right? So it's like differentiation and relevance, and going back to your whole, okay, so what next, right? So much of what I do as a coach, it's because I want to share the information that I wish I would have known 20, 30 years ago, right? Because it would have made a big difference. I made a lot of moves because of personal life changes, and that actually is valid. Like, you will make changes in your career. Things are going to happen to you, not necessarily of your choosing, but then being able to be more intentional over steering your career and looking at that portfolio of skills. Where are the spikes? What do I have to offer? What am I not good at? And then let me go fill those holes by advocating for what projects I want to work on, what industry groups I want to touch, what MDs or what officers are going to actually take me to meetings and be a mentor, as opposed to use me as a resource. Because there's a lot of the business world, period, where transactions, I mean, everyone's a resource. But how do you get it to that next level of real relationship building? And as someone early on in your career, I think that tactical, tangible advice is so critical, because for me, it was really hard for me to find mentors, right? When I started in financial services, more often than not, almost exclusively, I was the only woman in the room. I was the only person of color in the room, right? It was not easy to find mentors. However, a lot of the learning was by trial and error, and the mentors that I did have were phenomenal, right? And so the specific tips to have depth and breadth of experiences and to diversify that advice. I mean, most MBAs, it's the blind leading the blind, right? Like somebody who just did it the last year, or someone who's, in it a year from now, and chances are they're going to be out by the time you even go to that firm, right? Like, that's what I talk about tenure, right? Having the tenure matters too. The quality, the quantity, the tenure, people in your corner who can still be objective, right? And that was, I think, something that was key. What made me better as a recruiter is that I had a perspective as a banker, right? But what made me better as a coach was that I had the perspective of being a recruiter and a banker. And then additionally, sometimes if you think of, play devil's advocate for yourself, it's like, okay, well, there are tons of coaches out there. I know other bankers, but it's like, no, but they been a banker at lots of different industry groups, products, firms? Have they actually been behind the door of many firms, right? Having seen the other side of the table. Oh, okay. Well, I have recruiters that I talk to. Great. Something that I've experienced as a recruiter is you're the mouthpiece of that particular client. So it's not that easy to be, you can't always say the good, the bad, and the ugly, because you're an agent, right? And so there was a level of candor that I could be a lot more candid, just as I'm being candid with you, when I'm representing myself, as opposed to, okay, well, now I'm in HR, or now I'm representing a particular firm. right? So there's that level of candor. So being able to find tactical, tangible advice that's diversified, that's specific, but also objective, right? So it's not just like, oh, who can mentor me because someone's willing. It's also look at your relationships as a portfolio. Where are my relationships hitting in how I can give to them and then they can give back? And I think reciprocity is really important. When you're early on in your career, you're asking, and it puts you in the beggar's territory. It's like, please mentor me, please hire me, please this. It puts you at a lower level. But something I learned early in my career was I can be really young, I can be inexperienced and still add a ton of value if I do things a different way or I do things more thoroughly than everybody else. And so the mentors I did attract, they were able to just see it. They knew it when they saw it. And it was just like, okay, this person's worth it. However, you've got to do something with that advice. You've got to pay it forward. So,
Yeah.
personal branding, self advocacy, executive presence, all that is in the vein of, hey, speaking out and steering your career. But when you ask me, it's like, okay, well, what's next? How do you see your own business evolving now that you've done all these things? What I'm realizing, and this I would not have known 20, 30 years ago. So it's sort of like, hey, pay attention to this one. If you do good work begets more work, but then you start to have capacity issues. Earlier on, when you're younger, I was always able to just do more, right? Sleep a little less, do more. You got the energy, go, 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 go. So that expansiveness is very early on in your career. As you get more senior and as you're good at what you do, what I want to do is outpacing my capacity of time, right? I want to help more people than I actually have time for. And that was something that personally I struggled with. Because what's the next evolution in my own career is being more selective of who gets access to me. And I am choosing to invest in the people where they're going to pay it forward and do something with that access and privilege. And I think that's a line that no matter what level of seniority you're at, I would want the people listening to this podcast to take it away. Like, it is a privilege to have access to me. Doesn't matter who you are. It is a privilege to have access to me. What are the things in the portfolio that make that statement true? And then when you have that, use it wisely. And then when you have that, pay it forward and do something with that privilege, do something with that access. Because a lot of people go into financial services and they end up having great careers, they make a lot of money, but if they keep it for their own benefit, how much do they really pay it forward?
Yes, exactly. And I want to thank you for doing that right now in this moment, paying it forward with all this wisdom and insight from your experience. And Sandy, I feel like I have so many more questions to ask you, but we're out of time for today.
Well, there's always room for follow up. And again, when you have a wealth of experience or wisdom, it's not something you gain overnight, but it's also not something you can share in a soundbite either. Sometimes there's an amount of time and tenure that goes into it. And some careers are long, some careers are short, but even that is relative. And I would want everyone to have the career where they take what they love, what they're good at, and put it into how they can impact the clients or the people or the communities around them. And when you do that, not only do you rise, everyone around you rises.
Absolutely. Well said. And we will end on that note, Sandy. But before we go, can you please tell the listeners what is the best way to get in contact with you and find out more
Cool.
about what you do?
Sure. You can go to my website, which is just sandyleeexec.com, SandyLiexec.com. You can learn more about me there and also email me.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes for the listeners. So much for joining, Sandy, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much, Alex. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and I'm excited about this podcast and always happy to help.